Shots fired! Shots fired! You know. I'm here. I came in 5 minutes. Ain't fucking for free, so I gave her a fee when I bought her 5. I pull up in a 600. In the car. In the car. Oh. Price is cheaper than Family Dollar.
He goes like a fucking Hearthstone sound effect. He doesn't get shot. They sound like they've never used a gun before. It looks like it too. But I mean, you know he's been practicing that combat role. That shit was textbook. This video was from November. The cop who dodge rolled was fired. Really, they actually... That's pretty rare. I guess it was so cringe they're like, shit, we can't keep you around. Absolutely not. So now that you got to see it firsthand, hardcore Henry style, let's go ahead and see what this FPS game looks like from the outside. Let's see what the other officer got to witness.
What? What? Oh! Where? Right there? Jesse! Jesse, are you okay? Get in the house! Get in the house! Jesse! Get back! Get back! Where is he? Where is he?
I love the way that he crawls away, just scurries away like a cockroach, and the way that he, like, pretend gets shot. It reminds me of when you're a kid playing with your friends and you're just doing, like, imaginary cops and robbers. You're like, bang, 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 and then someone has to pretend they got shot, like, ooh, ah. That's exactly what happens there, where the officer's just, like, kneeling down, bang, 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 oh! And then, like, capsizes and falls over on the road there, and then he just starts crawling away. Oh, good lord. That's so frustrating to know that there's an officer out there, or was an officer out there like this, who can somehow hear an acorn fall and be like, shit, we're in a battleground, it's popping off, everyone, shoot at my car, quick, kill him. And I just have to wonder, what do you even do when the dust settles and you realize, oh, that guy in the car never had a gun, never shot back. Oh, wait. Buddy, I'm so sorry. It looks like it was an acorn that hit the cop car. I'm so sorry we shot at you for fucking 19 bullets in a row. Yeah, what a whoops-a-daisy moment. Oh my god. Sometimes I'm just so silly. Anyway, let's head to the station. Also, we're going to add an extra charge there for putting me into a state of frenzy. That's going to be on you. If we didn't have to get called out here in the first place, I wouldn't have had to hear an acorn fall and freak out. So that's going to be an additional charge. Like, what do you even do from there? There's nothing you can do from there. You almost killed this guy because you have superhuman hearing and thought for some reason an acorn was a threat to your life. I love this section too. Interviewed after the incident by Michael Hogan, an investigator, the deputy said he definitely heard a suppressed weapon firing. I felt an impact on my right side, like upper torso area. My legs just give out, he claimed. When shown images from his body cam footage of the acorn hitting his car, Mr. Hernandez asked, acorn? And Mr. Hogan confirmed, acorn. It's like a fucking skit out of a cartoon, except it's real life and almost cost someone their life. Almost just killed this guy over this fucking weirdo thinking an acorn was a suppressed weapon. Questioned if he could have mistaken the sound of an acorn for gunfire, he answered, what I heard sounded what I think would be louder than an acorn hitting the roof of the car, but there's obviously an acorn hitting the roof of the car. Oh my god. What the fuck? There's gotta be some better training. There's gotta be, right? Like, is this like a course they're gonna have to take now? Like, distinguishing gunshots from acorn sounds?
This is what we are faced with.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
Stop murdering thousands of children, said the evil, crazy Nazi. It's bad to murder children, the monster added. Children should not be slaughtered at mass scale with powerful military explosives. They should be allowed to remain alive and happy and healthy. What would lead someone to say something so hateful and depraved? What disgusting, conspiratorial, anti-Semitic online rabbit holes must this freak have slithered down in his path toward radicalization to say something so profoundly evil? One can only guess. We should not incinerate children and blow their guts out of their bodies with bombs, the world's worst person continued. 0 children should die by incineration, and their guts belong on the inside of their bodies. Now, I'm just as shocked and dismayed as you are. I thought we were beyond this. I thought we as a civilization had left this kind of genocidal rhetoric behind us with the end of Nazi Germany. But apparently, Adolf Hitler still lives on. This fiendish enemy of all things good and righteous went on to say that all Palestinians are human beings just like everyone else, and they should accordingly be given human rights instead of being exterminated like insects with some of the most sophisticated weaponry ever devised. I just don't think someone having a certain ethnicity makes it acceptable to butcher them at mass scale with modern war machinery and drive them off the land they wish to live on, the ghoul said, adding, I kind of think we ought to treat others how we ourselves would wish to be treated. No, I'm as liberal as the next person, and I absolutely support free speech. But this kind of repugnant blood libel is exactly why we need to be having some serious conversations about how far the right to free speech ought to go. We can't have deranged fascists running around our society, fomenting genocidal violence by spouting extremist rhetoric like, don't drop bombs on babies, and it's wrong to intentionally assassinate journalists. It makes me feel unsafe when people say such things, because I do not agree with the things they are saying. And, as we all know, the universe revolves around me and how my feelings feel. I therefore fear we have reached an unfortunate juncture in our society where we've no choice but to censor the internet, ban TikTok, prohibit pro-Palestine demonstrations, and make it illegal to be a Zoomer. The only alternative is to allow horrifying radicalization like what we just witnessed here to continue.
The ceasefire resolution that Russia and China just vetoed at the UN isn't actually a ceasefire. The resolution the US proposed says that there's an imperative for an immediate ceasefire, but it never actually calls on Israel to stop its massacre. The corporate media is reporting that Russia and China have just vetoed a ceasefire, but don't actually tell you that Russia and China vetoed the resolution precisely because the ambiguous language would allow Israel to continue its massacre. And that's exactly what the US and Israel wanted. They proposed this resolution knowing it would be vetoed, so every headline in all the major news networks would say Russia and China vetoed a ceasefire. This is part of a clear strategy emerging within the US ruling class to flip the narrative by making it look like the US wants a ceasefire and that it's the Palestinians who are blocking it. A few weeks ago, Kamala Harris came out and announced that she wanted to see a ceasefire in Gaza, which shocked everyone. The video circulated like wildfire, and the corporate media was running headlines praising Kamala Harris, saying, Kamala Harris has proposed a ceasefire. But if you actually watch the full clip, Kamala Harris says immediately after that she's calling for a 6-week temporary ceasefire, one that's already on the table.
There must be an immediate ceasefire for at least the next 6 weeks, which is what is currently on the table.
The ceasefire proposal she's referring to is the Israeli one, which would pause the fighting for 6 weeks, during which Israel would get all of its prisoners back, and then the genocidal invasion of Rafah would continue. The ceasefire that Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, Gavin Newsom, and all of these US diplomats have come out in support of isn't actually a ceasefire that would end the war. It's literally Israel's exact negotiating position being repackaged as a ceasefire, one that would pause the fighting long enough so that Israel can get all of its people out, which would then allow Israel to decimate Rafah without having to worry about any domestic backlash. Israel has been clear from day one that their goal is the total takeover of Gaza and the destruction of the resistance. So the word ceasefire is essentially being co-opted by the Biden administration here, and we have to start asking what people mean when they use the word ceasefire. The Biden administration is trying to confuse people by saying they support a ceasefire, but the ceasefire they're proposing is completely different from the ceasefire the vast majority of the world wants, which is a permanent end to the genocide.
Every time I try to say I'm here, but I have to say it in Arabic because they didn't understand my English.
Why you didn't travel like outside here? Why?
because if I were to go outside, I would be like a monophic. I really believe that all Muslims need to be treated equally as an American living in Gaza. I feel that all the Arabs in the world should be here helping, not just me. I feel like I'm the only foreigner in Gaza right now, and I would never leave, because if Israel's going to take all of Gaza or all of Palestine, that they want everyone to leave. That's why I stayed, because I don't want them to take Palestine.
Israel apologists are psychopaths. Notes from the edge of the narrative matrix. I refuse to conflate the Jewish religion with the criminal activity of a government and its military, and I think it's dangerous that people insist that I should. Israel apologists are such psychopaths. In the last few days, I've seen 2 separate articles attacking the idea that there are innocent people in Gaza. One from the Times of Israel titled "Innocent People in Gaza? Don't Be Naive," and another from Town Hall titled "There Are No Innocent Palestinians." Just as disturbing as seeing the endless stream of dead babies and children's bodies blown apart by military explosives on my feed is having to read so many of my fellow humans defending these horrors in the most sociopathic ways imaginable. One of the most brain-dead responses I get from Israel apologists all the time is, "Just tell Hamas to surrender and this whole war ends." Like that's a thing. Like Hamas are hanging on my every word and they'll be like, "Hang on, you guys, one more white Westerner just said we should surrender. Let's wrap it up, fellas." Like, even if you accept the pants-on-head moronic notion that these horrors are 100% the fault of Hamas and 0% the fault of Israel and everything it's done since October 7th and prior to October 7th, and even if you ignore international law, which says Palestinians have a right to defend themselves against hostile occupiers, while Israel has no right to launch an attack to defend itself against people it is occupying, this argument still makes no sense. Hamas, unlike Israel, has no political responsiveness to the demands of the West. They have no reason to listen to anything we say. Westerners putting political pressure on our own governments to stop facilitating this nightmare absolutely does have an effect, and we're seeing more and more signs that both Israel and its Western allies are getting very nervous about the mounting international pressure from the public. Pretending the same is true of Hamas, who has no motive whatsoever to heed Western governments and their electorates, is just evading reality to advance an agenda. And Israel apologists know this. They're just throwing up every distraction and red herring they can think of to try and drag opposition to Israel's mass atrocities off course. Tell Hamas to surrender just means stop criticizing Israel's actions. Look over there, not over here. Shut up. Be silent. Go away. The problem is not the words and phrases people use when protesting a genocidal massacre of civilians. The problem is the genocidal massacre of civilians. If children are being slaughtered by the thousands in a horrific massacre and someone tries to make the conversation about what words and phrases you're allowed to use when opposing that massacre, the correct thing to do is to tell that person to shut the fuck up. U.S. empire managers always act like telling Israel to end this mass atrocity would be an intercession on Israel's sovereignty, as though that would be the U.S. intervening in foreign affairs. In reality, the U.S. doesn't need to intervene in Israeli affairs to end the bloodshed. All it has to do is stop intervening by backing the slaughter. Israelis are completely open about the fact that this onslaught would be impossible without U.S. weapons and other support. The U.S. could at any time simply stop intervening by backing Israeli crimes against humanity, and Israel would be forced to stop. They reverse reality by misrepresenting non-interventionism as interventionism, and the end of an intervention as an intervention. In the same way they reverse the role of victim and victimizer, aggressor and defender, genocide perpetrators and genocide targets, etc. This lets them wash their hands of the atrocity by pretending they're just respecting Israel's sovereignty, when in reality they're just as responsible for the atrocity as Israel. It's like holding someone down and punching them in the face and telling onlookers, "I'm sorry, I can't intervene in the sovereign affairs of my fist." The call isn't for the U.S. to start intervening between Israel and Gaza. The call is for it to stop.
Norm Finkelstein had a rendezvous with destiny, we will call this segment.
I mean, that is what you have to name this when you drop the podcast.
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I put that in the thumbnail tonight. That's going to be the name of the audio podcast tomorrow. Norm and his friend Muin Rabini debated Destiny and Benny Morris on the topic of Israel-Palestine. It was a 5-hour debate hosted by Lex Friedman. I did watch the entire thing. And throughout that 5 hours...
5 hours?
5 hours. And as you'll see throughout that entire thing, Norm Finkelstein can't get Destiny's name exactly right. He keeps calling him something different several times throughout the show. Now, we're going to play you, somebody posted on X, and I'll put this in the comment section. I'll find out who did this supercut, and I will post it in the comment, or in the description of the clip, rather, because you should definitely give them a follow, because to go through 5 hours and cut together this supercut was pretty impressive work. So we're going to see a pretty hilarious montage of Norm dunking on Mr. Borelli, Bonelli, Fratelli, Morelli. He keeps calling himself different. So we're just going to do this first. But what I will say, as someone who watched the whole thing, Norm was actually quite patient.
You're insane.
I watched it. Well, you know, I had it on in the background while I was doing other work. I didn't sit and intently stare at the screen for 5 hours. But Norm was very patient. He didn't really start getting annoyed until like 2.5 hours in. Like all of these insults that we're about to see are from the second half. So this was already 2.5 hours in. He didn't come in.
He was trying to be
blazing.
gracious.
Yeah, he was trying to be gracious, but you can only be gracious for so long. He didn't come in guns blazing, but here's how this went. This is pretty great stuff.
Your name, please?
Stephen Bonnell.
Okay. I don't think you understand politics.
You're very binary thinking when it comes to
binary.
Yes, binary.
Please don't give me this postmodernism binary. Believe me, I'm a lot more literate than you, Mr. Borelli.
I'm gonna believe the guy that wrote
you
this
read
stuff.
what Wikipedia says. It's called attaching value to words and not talking like a motor mouth.
That's not controversial.
Mr. Bonnell, please slow down the speech and attempt to listen.
Legal
you don't
standard.
Know what's the correct
I know absolutely.
Law. You
no,
haven't
but, Norm, I absolutely.
You
do,
haven't
Norm.
the clue.
I absolutely.
I
do.
think.
But I'm just saying. I'm just saying. Believe it or not, Norm. Literally,
Mr.
you
Borelli,
can
Mr.
Google
Borelli,
it.
with all due respect, you're such a fantastic moron. It's terrifying. What are you talking about? It's so painful. It's so painful to listen to this idiocy. I will answer the question. I will even answer
and it was because that was a strike. That was a drone to kill Palestinians.
You want me to answer, or do you want your motor mouth to go? Hey, laugh. It's hilarious. The story's so funny. You see, the problem, Mr. Morelli, is you don't know the English language. Please stop with your idiotic.
The vast majority of protesters who acted in a peaceful manner.
No, listen, talk fast.
I'm
So
just
people think that you're coherent.
I'm just reading.
Got the months wrong. You got the months wrong. Aside from Wikipedia, can you tell me what your knowledge of the IDF is?
You can talk to people who work in the military.
What's your knowledge of the IDF? It's true. It's true. I don't spend my nights on Wikipedia. I read books. Even the American judge, she must have been awful incompetent if she was unable to see the misrepresentations that Mr. Bonnell, based on his Wikipedia entry, was able to find.
So this is based on
Mr.
Borelli,
Mr. Borelli, please don't teach me about the English language.
Special intent.
I'm going to ask you again.
Yes.
Please stop displaying your imbecility.
Okay, I'm sorry if you think the declaration of the judge is imbecility.
Don't put on public display that you're a moron. At least have the self-possession to shut up. You know anything about how the UN system works?
If you
just throw out words. You hear binding,
Does
not
2 for 2
binding.
even...
It may be meaningless to you, Mr.
It was
Bonnell.
meaningless to everyone.
Mr. Benel, don't change the subject. If you don't know what you're talking about, at least have the humility. You talk about chapter 6. You don't know chapter 6.
How close has 242
You don't
gotten
know
to the
chapter
Palestinians'
6
peace?
from tweet 5. You have no idea what you're talking about. It's just so embarrassing. At least have some humility. Between us, we've read maybe 10,000 books on the topic, and you've read 2 Wikipedia entries, and you start talking about chapter 6. Do you know what chapter 7 is? Destiny should talk about making money off of idiocy.
You go and talk, only option is conflict.
Listen to this.
Only option is
Mr.
combat.
Benel is now an expert on Palestinian mentality.
All of the international
Everybody, wait. You're contradicting.
Starting ground. I'm sorry, I can talk slow. You can watch YouTube videos, slow it down to 0.5 speed if you don't understand what I'm saying.
Let me fit. There's a very lengthy history.
It's great.
Farrell, at least I had a quote to
That's
take.
great.
All you have
And
is
I can-
Wikipedia. You don't know what you're talking about.
It's the internet.
I'm not happy to say that.
Of course you are.
It's a... Mr. Benel, I don't think I've avoided any of your questions, except when they breach the threshold of complete imbecility. Everyone in here, it's so boring.
because it's
It's so boring.
What gives you hope?
There is no hope.
Okay, all right. So this was hosted by Lex Friedman, I guess, that YouTube is obsessed with trying to get me to pay attention to.
Yep.
I swear, so when I put on my videos in the middle of the night, I fall asleep. That's the intention. And it always auto plays. I wake up to fucking Lex Friedman, like always. So people who say that he's an op, I'm inclined to believe you, because the way the algorithm should work, if you keep shutting it off,
right?
Shouldn't they stop giving it to you? It's not like I ever watch it, but they keep feeding me Lex Friedman.
Yeah. Well, he's got a lot of subscribers. He's got almost 4 million.
I don't understand it. He's fucking boring as shit. And when it comes to the subject of Ukraine, he's completely biased.
Right.
I saw him interviewing a CIA guy, basically pulling a Jim Carrey. So there's a chance. You know, he just kept saying to the CIA guy, but hang on, what about the spirit of the Ukrainians? And the guy's like, yeah, well, Russia has this and that. But what if the Ukrainians do a rain dance? No, I don't think the rain dance is... Okay, what if Zelensky makes deal with devil? Okay, sure. Right. You know, he just would not let it go. Which, if you're trying to do what he's trying to do, which seems to be not opinion journalism, you don't do that. Like, if that's your lane, if you're a pontificator, fine. I think what's kind of amazing about these clips is, okay, Lex Friedman, whatever, man, I don't understand why he has a following, but he's experienced.
Right.
You throw this guy in with these three?
With these three, yeah.
Like, how did you think that was going to go? And in some ways, it is an indictment of the whole bread tube scene, because you put the average commentator on YouTube in a room with serious, knowledgeable academics, and they're going to get eaten alive.
Yes, and as you could see, Benny Morris, who was the pro-Israel debate partner of Destiny, even laughed at one point at Norm's digs, and Norm, throughout the 5-hour interview, would commend Benny Morris's writing. He said, I've read a lot of his books.
In the end, they all respect each other, and none of them respect this guy.
Right, exactly. He was just a fish out of water. How did he get a seat at that table? They couldn't find another scholar of the topic.
Right.
And look, Norm is a treasure. I love Norm. We've interviewed him 3 times, twice on this show, once on the Jimmy Dore show. And he's great to us. We get along great. We even make each other laugh sometimes, which is fun. But he is definitely an academic in the sense that he could you definitely get the sense from him that he's the kind of guy who can constantly be asking himself, why am I here? Why am I talking to you? Like, if he doesn't think that you're in his league, he definitely registers that. Not that, I mean, I'm a college dropout. I'm not in his league. He never said that to me, But you can get the sense when you're talking to him that he's got that wheel turning in his head. Hey, who are these schmucks? Should I be talking to them? It's not to say he's not a totally nice dude, he is. But when you put him in a situation with Destiny for 5 hours, yeah, that's going to come out. And it came out in about hour 3. He was a class act for the first couple hours, but after a while, he just couldn't take it anymore. And the real old school academic in him that's like, why do I have to talk to this guy? Who the fuck is this guy? He just couldn't keep that contained for 5 full hours.
Well, see, that's really part of my question here. You got to know your limitations, man. If I were asked to sit on this debate, I would decline it. I'm not qualified to be debating Norman Finkelstein on his life's work.
Exactly.
I would interview him about it. That's my job. That's what I do. Right? I platform somebody like Norm, but I'm not Norm. I'm not going to debate that guy. Even if he's wrong, I'm going to lose because he knows so much about it.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Not only would I never debate Norm, I mean, in this case, I think Norm is right on this.
On that subject.
There'd be no need to. But even Destiny's debate partner, Benny Morris, I wouldn't debate him on this because I would be afraid that because he's so much more knowledgeable, he would embarrass me and I would embarrass my cause.
You would hurt your position.
Hurt my position by getting a fool made out of me by a guy who just knows more. That's why I would hesitate to, or I would straight up decline. I'm like, no, I can't debate Benny Morris on this, right? Because, he knows more than me, which means he'll stump me, and then I will make my side of the argument look bad. Destiny, obviously, that never occurred to him. I mean, he approached it with just such pomposity, and that is what you could see got to Norm over time, because he takes this very seriously. His partner, Muin Rabini, was really an unsung hero of that debate because he was excellent too. He was really good. I encourage everybody to watch it. But yeah, there were 3 serious guys and then a fucking moron, as Norm said.
Well, this was like the movie about the actor who plays tough guys who thought he was tough.
Right.
Yeah. So you talk like you know what you're talking about, and you convinced yourself that you actually do.
Right.
And then you got in a room with people who actually do, and you got exposed as the moron that you are.
Out of Gaza, where Israeli forces killed at least 100 people, wounding hundreds more after opening fire on a crowd of Palestinians waiting for aid. Palestinian authorities have called it a massacre. The Gaza Health Ministry says the attack killed 112, injuring more than 750 others. They say tanks opened fire as Palestinians waited for aid. Israel says people were crowding aid trucks and looting them. And Israel says people were killed from pushing and trampling, also claiming that it was 2 incidents and not 1. They say there was the issue with aid trucks and then the shooting, which happened just a couple of yards away. They say their troops opened fire when civilians ignored warnings to step away from a checkpoint. The Palestinian Health Ministry says more than 30,000 people have been killed in Gaza since the war began.
Don't equate the violence of the oppressor with the violence of the oppressed. Notes from the edge of the narrative matrix. Israel has once again stormed Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital. Israel spent the first few weeks of the Gaza assault churning out fake audio clips of Hamas fighters exonerating the IDF from attacking hospitals and healthcare workers, and has spent all the months since just unapologetically attacking hospitals and healthcare workers. CNN's Dana Bash just gave an adoring rim job of an interview to Benjamin Netanyahu, telling him, "You're not Hamas. Israel is a democracy, and as a Jewish state, supports and believes in every life mattering." If Netanyahu was interviewed by an actual journalist, he'd be forcefully interrogated with extremely uncomfortable questions about his genocidal atrocities in Gaza. When Netanyahu goes on CNN, the anchor recites all of his pro-genocide talking points for him, so he doesn't have to. The underlying assumption behind the claim that Hamas needs to be eliminated is that Israel should be able to inflict non-stop violence on Palestinians day after day, year after year, generation after generation, without ever receiving any violence in return. You can't equate the violence of the oppressor with the violence of the oppressed. They're not the same, and the oppressor is the ultimate source of the violence from both sides. Say you've got a group of blue guys and a group of green guys. If the blue guys have power over the green guys and are constantly oppressing them, stealing from them, using violence on them, and generally making life intolerable for the people they have power over, then the blue guys have no moral standing to get indignant and outraged when the green guys start responding to this with their own violence. That would be a ridiculous and illogical position for anyone to take. In fact, if you look at what happened in our hypothetical scenario here, the blue guys are morally responsible for both their own violence and the violence of the green guys, because they created the dynamics in which both happened. Had the blue guys not been oppressing and abusing the green guys would not have responded with violence. And you can argue, but the green guys aren't making things any better with their violence. It's just making the blue guys madder and more violent. But that's completely irrelevant to the question of responsibility, and to the fact that if the blue guys stop their violence and abuse, there will be a cessation of violence from both sides. The solution, therefore, is not to spend any energy whatsoever yelling at the green guys to stop being violent. The solution is to demand the blue guys stop being violent, abusive, and oppressive toward the green guys, because that is the source of violence between the two groups. The violence of the blue guys is a cause, while the violence of the green guys is only an effect. You cannot therefore regard them in the same way, either morally or practically. Niger kicking the French military out of the country was interesting and potentially significant. Niger kicking out both France and the US is a major development. To borrow a line from Django Unchained, "Gentlemen, you had my curiosity, but now you have my attention." The US is backing a genocide and waging a proxy war against a nuclear superpower, while the American people struggle with stagnant wages, a broken healthcare system, and soaring costs of living. So naturally, Americans are being told they need to be very, very worried about China. Right-wingers who regard themselves as bold, anti-establishment freethinkers are currently defending the world's most powerful government, supplying bombs to drop on a giant concentration camp, with arguments that ultimately boil down to, "But the TV would never lie to me." If opposition to an act of genocide shocks and offends you, that's a character flaw, and you should change that about yourself. If it shocks and offends you because of your religious identity, that too is a character flaw. Supporting mass murder because of your religion is not a legitimate position to have.
Another important vote, which was in Michigan, with over 100,000 people casting their vote for uncommitted, sending a message to Genocide Joe that he's not going to have their support for supporting the Israeli genocide. And there are now widespread reports that actually this is really worrying people inside the White House, because 100,000 votes is a lot of people, and in Michigan that will certainly make the difference in against Trump, because this is, after all, a swing state, and margins come down really to very, very, very small amounts. Certainly a lot less than 100,000 people voting uncommitted.
This vote was organized, and I know you've covered it on Useful Idiots in more detail. But this vote was organized in 3 weeks. This was spontaneous, grassroots. It's one of the most remarkable political protests I've seen in a primary campaign that didn't involve a candidate. There is no candidate. It's that guy Dean
Phillips.
Dean Phillips. I mean, what is that? I actually interviewed him once in Congress, and I said, what do you think about the Trump administration coup in Venezuela? He said, well, I'm going to wait for the briefing, the House Foreign Affairs briefing, before I form my opinion. So
AOC said the same thing, basically. She said, I'll defer to the party leadership on this, which meant supporting the coup.
So, the population of Michigan knows better, particularly the Arab and Muslim population, where they have the highest number. They know better than to give away their vote to someone who's committing genocide, in many cases killing members of their own family. But it's not just Arabs and Muslims. I know this. Anya, my wife, our colleague, she's from Michigan. Her family's from there. Members of her family voted uncommitted. They are not Arab or Muslim. Many people in Ann Arbor, where she's from, did. Joe Biden lost Dearborn by like 80% to uncommitted this time, though. He received over 80% of the vote in Dearborn in 2020 and 4% this time. So this sends a clear message, and it's a message that the White House is not acknowledging. Have they said anything about this? Issued any statements?
No, and in fact, there's an article out, I think, in the Washington Post today about how the White House is working now to insulate Biden from any pro-Palestinian anti-genocide protests, like trying to limit his appearances now so that he won't come across people calling him out for supporting the genocide as he did recently in Virginia, where he gave a speech and was interrupted multiple times. So their only response really is to try to insulate him from further criticism.
Yeah. And interacting with people. Like, imagine Biden face to face with a Palestinian who has lost family in Gaza. Just not, it wouldn't be good. And he'd probably shout at them and blame Hamas for the deaths or something, as he's done with many other people. So this lack of response and lack of acknowledgement shows how little Biden and the Biden administration and the Democratic Party establishment cares about their own constituents and about winning this key swing state. Who does Biden care about? He cares about Haim Saban and Casey Wasserman, Hollywood moguls who hosted a $250,000 a head fundraiser for Joe Biden earlier this month in Beverly Hills at the home of Haim Saban, who said, "I'm a one-issue guy and my issue is Israel." These are ultra-Zionist mafia dons who are top donors to the Democratic Party, and that's who Biden is answering to. Biden raised a record $42 million in January. He's raising huge amounts of money because he's actually effectively catering to the donor class, the 1% who largely support genocide in Palestine. And that's who he's going to continue catering to all the way to November. So this protest in Michigan, it's going to go to Chicago. And Biden, he's not going to respond. So what do you do next? What do you do? People have to start exiting the Democratic Party and looking at third-party candidates like Jill Stein, who is urging voters to sign a no genocide pledge. I would put it to a lot of liberals I know. What if Joe Biden declared, as he has sort of said over the years, that he opposes abortion, that he would support the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision and take away a woman's right to choose whether or not to have an abortion? He said at points that he's not pro-choice, but he goes along with the party line very strongly, and he's obviously not in control anymore anyway. But what if he did that? What if the Biden administration said we're anti-abortion now? They would not vote for him. Most liberals, especially liberal women, the kind who came out in huge numbers to protest the Dobbs decision, it would be the protest we saw in Michigan. It would be like that on steroids in every primary state. So some of us have a red line with genocide and with apartheid Israel as well. And so we're drawing the red line. And they're going to have to pay the price for that. And the Democrats have to know at a certain point, they're going to have to change their policy on Israel, which is that aid to Israel must end and Israel must be sanctioned, or they don't receive our votes. It's the only way to get it done.
Well, my definition of terrorism is the systematic and deliberate attack, the murder, maiming, and menacing of innocents, civilians, for political goals. You can tell a lot about terrorists, but what happens when they come to power? Those who fight for freedom and come to power do not impose terrorism. Those who do, who fight in terroristic means, end up as being masters of terrorist states.
So let's look at an Africa that must be free to take care of herself, an Africa that's free from exploitation from outsiders. The multinationals who are stealing from Africa every day in broad daylight. I use an example of the DRC. If you ever fly very low over the DRC, you'll see tarmacs in the jungle. You'll see 747s flying into DRC, picking up minerals and flying right out. The same multinationals are responsible for arming young people and giving them MK-16s. Because why? Their satellites in the skies are telling them where that village is There are lots of diamonds. So what do? Arm young people, drag them up, and send them to go chop off a few heads. The rest of the village runs away, so they come behind and do their illegal mining. We black people must understand what is really going on. Because what we are shown instead is, oh, look at those Africans killing each other. There are some serious games that have been played in Africa for far too long.
Every time there's a conversation that comes up about white people's entitlement and this Cape independence thing, people like to use this, oh, but you're not all from here. Most of you are like Central African. The only people who are here first are Khoisan. Don't act like you give about Khoi or San people at all. You also can't use the logic of you're not Southern African, you're Central African or East African. Africa didn't have borders until white people got here. The only reason South Africa exists is because colonialists back in the 1800s decided that they wanted to chop up Africa like a little cheesecake and share it. White people in South Africa are descendants of colonizers. I am an indigenous person. I'm indigenous to the whole continent. Nigeria is my home the same way that Kenya is my home. South Africa is a colonial construct that y'all created.
Now out of Idaho, where a manhunt is underway for an Idaho convict and an accomplice who helped him escape during a shootout at a hospital. Raina Roy reports.
Any unit available for a man gun, St. Al, 1065 North Curtis.
A desperate search underway in Idaho for a convicted felon who escaped custody Wednesday.
I want to make sure that the public knows these folks are dangerous.
Police say 31-year-old Skylar Mead escaped during an attack at this hospital in Boise, Idaho that left 3 officers shot. Authorities identifying his alleged accomplice as Nicholas Umpenhauer.
This was a coordinated attack, ambush on the Department of Corrections officers, and certainly a planned endeavor to free him from custody.
As Mead was being transported back to a maximum security prison, Umpenhauer opened fire, hitting 2 corrections officers, according to investigators. Mead and Umpenhauer escaping. A Boise officer who responded to the scene accidentally shot a 3rd corrections officer.
Last seen, unknown direction of travel, newer model gray Honda Civic with 2 Charles plates, occupied by 2.
Mead, who was serving 20 years for shooting at officers during a car chase, was taken to the hospital Tuesday night from the prison from what officials called self-inflicted wounds.
Our on-site medical determined that he needed to be transported off-site for emergent care.
Police say Mead was also part of a white supremacist group. Meanwhile, all the officers are expected to be okay. The prison now investigating how this happened and if the men had any other help.
Israel apologia is one big fat appeal to emotion fallacy. Notes from the edge of the narrative matrix. The Israeli hostages deserve far, far less interest and attention than the hundreds of thousands of Gazans who are being starved and murdered as we speak. The only way to believe otherwise is to believe Israeli lives are worth thousands of times more than Palestinian lives. The PR campaign for Israel's destruction of Gaza revolves around encouraging everyone to focus on the feelings of the people on the pro-Israel side, instead of focusing on facts and evidence. The way Israelis are feeling about October 7th, the way Israelis are feeling about the hostages, the way pro-Palestine demonstrations make Western Jews feel inside. What feelings Biden is privately feeling toward Netanyahu. The whole thing's one big fat appeal to emotion fallacy. Meanwhile, the feelings of the 2 million Palestinians being starved, displaced, dismembered, traumatized, terrorized, and having to watch their loved ones die horrific deaths right in front of them never features. We're discouraged from thinking about their emotions at all. Only the feelings of the people who support these atrocities shall draw our attention and sympathy, thereby generating support for the continuation of those atrocities. There's a tweet by Ahmed M. Sadek. It's a video of a British doctor who treated Palestinian victims of Israeli airstrikes in Gaza. The doctor says, "I will never forget it. A child's face was burned so much that you could see her facial bones. We didn't even have morphine to give her to ease the pain. She died painfully in the corridor of the emergency room." Comment from Caitlin. Palestinians in Gaza have been experiencing unfathomable suffering for nearly 6 months now. But the entire Western political media class has been insisting since October 7th that we center the feelings of Israelis and Western Jews at all times. Palestinian anguish doesn't count. In December, a former legal advisor to the State Department named Brian Finucane warned the Washington Post that the first Israeli attack on Al-Shifa Hospital back in November could be used as a precedent to, quote, pre-excuse future operations against hospitals. Which is exactly what ended up happening. Israel has since been obliterating hospitals throughout the enclave and has attacked Al-Shifa 3 more times since then. The propagandists who've been manufacturing public consent for this mass atrocity are just as guilty as the ones dropping the bombs. Israel apologists will always have excuses and justifications for every horrible thing that comes out about what Israel is doing in Gaza. There is no testimony, investigative report, statistic, or raw video clip that could come out showing horrific criminality on the part of the IDF or the Israeli state that would cause Israel supporters to go, "Oh, okay, now this one really is bad. Israel needs to hold those responsible to account and make some dramatic systemic changes to make sure it never happens again." This is because the function of Israel apologia, also known as Hasbara, has never ever been to promote truth or justice. Its purpose has always been to promote and defend the information interests of the State of Israel. This is why no matter what Israel is exposed as having done, you will always see prominent Israel apologists in politics and media, as well as ordinary Israel apologists on social media, providing excuses and justifications for it. They're not there to tell the truth, or to help the public understand what's happening, or to help create a more just and ethical world. Their sole aim is to advance the information interests of their favorite ethno-state to ensure its continued support. But the fact that so many thousands of people need to be working at this every single day shows how depraved Israel really is. Every genocidal regime in history has always had reasons and justifications for its behavior, and that's all Israel apologists are providing today. Don't take their manipulations seriously. When I'm criticizing U.S. aggressions toward Russia, I get called a Kremlin agent a lot. When I'm criticizing U.S. aggressions toward China, I get called a CCP propagandist. Now I'm criticizing U.S.-Israeli aggressions in Gaza, and they say I'm an anti-Semite. At a certain point you figure out that there are just a lot of bootlickers out there who don't like it when you criticize the world's most powerful government, so they call you names. That's all it ever is. Vapid name-calling. It's what people do when they have no argument, when facts and morality are not on their side. Revisiting John Pilger's 2016 warnings about U.S. warmongering against Russia and China. In March of 2016, the renowned Australian journalist and filmmaker John Pilger published an article titled, "A World War Has Begun. Break the Silence," which urgently warned of the U.S. empire's aggressive escalations against Russia and China. Rereading parts of it in 2023 is like watching someone placing flags next to recently planted seeds that would eventually grow into the towering problems our world now faces. It's like listening to a time traveler warning people from the past about a grave mistake they were about to make. Pilger points to U.S. provocations in Ukraine, NATO militarism, and the encirclement of China, and warns of the surging risk of nuclear war, noting that nuclear warhead spending rose higher under Obama than under any American president. In the last 18 months, the greatest buildup of military forces since World War II, led by the United States, is taking place along Russia's western frontier, Pilger wrote. Not since Hitler invaded the Soviet Union have foreign troops presented such a demonstrable threat to Russia. Ukraine, once part of the Soviet Union, has become a CIA theme park, wrote Pilger. Having orchestrated a coup in Kiev, Washington effectively controls a regime that is next door and hostile to Russia, a regime rotten with Nazis, literally. Prominent parliamentary figures in Ukraine are the political descendants of the notorious OUN and UPA fascists. They openly praise Hitler and call for the persecution and expulsion of the Russian-speaking minority. In Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, next door to Russia, the U.S. military is deploying combat troops, tanks, heavy weapons, Pilger said. This extreme provocation of the world's second nuclear power is met with silence in the West. What makes the prospect of nuclear war even more dangerous is a parallel campaign against China, Pilger continued. The United States is encircling China with a network of bases with ballistic missiles, battle groups, nuclear-armed bombers. This lethal arc extends from Australia to the islands of the Pacific, the Marianas and the Marshalls and Guam, to the Philippines, Thailand, Okinawa, Korea, and across Eurasia to Afghanistan and India. America has hung a noose around the neck of China. This is not news. Silence by media. War by media.
I gotta tell you again, you're fired.
Pilger highlighted the way his home country, Australia, was being roped into Washington's war preparations against China, a trend which has since grown much worse as the drums of war grow louder. In 2015, in high secrecy, the U.S. and Australia staged the biggest single air-sea military exercise in recent history, known as Talisman Sabre, he wrote. Its aim was to rehearse an air-sea battle plan, blocking sea lanes such as the Straits of Malacca and Lombok Straits that cut off China's access to oil, gas, and other vital raw materials from the Middle East and Africa. Pilger wrote all this while preparing to release his excellent film The Coming War on China, which would come out later that year. In it, he shows how the U.S. has been surrounding China with war machinery in a way that would be considered an act of war if it was happening near American shorelines, and drives home the seriousness of the prospect of nuclear conflict. Everything Pilger warned about turned out to be everything he said it was. A war in Ukraine has erupted from the spark of the US-backed coup in 2014 and Russia's fear of an increasingly expansionist and militaristic NATO, while the US military encirclement of China has been rapidly increasing as hostilities between the two superpowers accelerate toward a breaking point, facilitated in no small part by the continent-sized military base known as Australia. What were only background stories in 2016 now dominate the headlines of today. I bring this up because I think it's useful to show that we've been on this track toward global conflict between major powers for years, and it's been unfolding in ways that some saw coming from miles away. Much of Pilger's work could be called prophetic, but Pilger is no prophet. He's just a journalist with an ear to the ground who's been critically scrutinizing the behavior of the empire for decades. He was able to accurately mark the trajectory our world has been on earlier than most, and it has continued along that same trajectory with frightening speed ever since. If you can see the trajectory that an object is on, you can determine where you need to stand in order to obstruct its path. The fact that we've been on a linear trajectory toward global conflict between nuclear-armed states all these years shows that opposing that trajectory is of existential importance for every living organism on this planet. And yet the media still want us to focus on celebrity gossip and Donald Trump. World war is still closing in on us. We still need to break the silence and oppose it. Our rulers have been steering us in this direction for a long time now, and they're not going to turn away until we make them.
Things you mentioned was Tucker's interview with Vladimir Putin. I want to get your opinion about that because I have some mixed opinions. One of the things I did find out during that interview that I was not aware of, I had no idea that Russia tried to join NATO. So that was a surprise to me. I learned a little bit more about Bill Clinton and Bush as well. But I had a little bit mixed reactions. I was glad the interview happened because I did learn some things that obviously mainstream media and our State Department is not telling us in reference to Russia and where they stand on certain issues. But also at the same time, I kind of was like, you know, Tucker, going over there, obviously they're going to see you as a target. So when all of these attacks came towards Tucker Carlson and he had a follow-up interview and he said that he was surprised that his country was treating him this way, I was like, what did you expect to happen?
Here's my proposal. Those powerful armed forces of the world should be instructed by their presidents or prime ministers that they will go to the Rafah border and their soldiers will escort all those trucks into Gaza and the West Bank. And since these are very close friends of Israel, surely they will be allowed safe passage. I can't imagine them being fired by the Israeli forces. This, it seems to me, is the only way that we might get aid in, because otherwise it will be a trickle, more children will starve, more babies will be born with very serious harm to their health.
I don't need guns, I need fire extinguishers. Pointing pistols as the man burns, as Gaza burns, as civilization burns, as the planet burns. I don't need guns, I need fire extinguishers. Raytheon racketeers and Pentagon pimps, swollen fat from the blood of unnamed victims glossed over in headlines by the New York Times, while National Guard troops patrol the New York subways and babies with legs like toothpicks fill our screens. Pouring arms into Israel while humanitarian LARPing aid airdrops. Waving around Armageddon weapons while accusing peacemongers of treason. Well, sure, I'd ask for seconds, Mr. President, sir. But see, I don't need guns. I need fire extinguishers. I need someone to put some fat back on those babies. I need someone to get the plastic out of the oceans. I need the bombs to stop and the siege to lift, and a healthy planet for the kids to play in. I need kids to stop getting their limbs blown off so they can run and play in that healthy world. Can you drone strike me a thriving biosphere? Can you ICBM those Gazans some food? Can you extinguish this fire with your weapons and wars? No? Then get out of the way, man. We don't need guns. We need fire extinguishers. Free Palestine, the man on fire said. Free Palestine, he screamed. And then the cops showed up with their guns and their bullets, because of course they fucking did. And Gaza still burns, and the world still burns, and our eyes still burn, and our lungs still burn, and our hearts still burn, and our rage still burns. And they promise us the burning will stop if we just add in a few more guns. We don't need guns, you stupid cop. We need this burning world to heal.
The immense scale of suffering in Gaza, there must be an immediate ceasefire.
Wait for it. Wait for it.
For at least the next 6 weeks.
For at least the next 6 weeks. So she's just reiterating what the Biden policy is. And she goes on to say that it's Hamas that needs to accept this. This is the deal on the table. Hamas needs to accept this. So the onus is on Hamas to basically bend to Israeli-U.S. demands. And, you know, what's amazing there is, again, she's tacitly admitting that Israel and the U.S. are using aid as a weapon, because she says if Hamas accepts this, then a significant amount of aid will get in.
Right.
Well, if aid going in is conditional on hostages being released, that's an admission that you're using aid as a weapon. You're starving people on purpose. I wonder if that pause was on purpose.
Yeah, so that they clipped it.
Yeah, so that they clip just that, so that people can think as if they're calling for a ceasefire when they're actually not.
Nobody with real power cares if you refuse to vote for Biden. There's been a lot of talk in pro-Palestine circles about withholding votes for Biden in protest of his genocide in Gaza, which is of course fine. But the discourse around doing so often misses an important point. A lot of US voters erroneously think they'd be punishing the Democrats for Gaza by costing them the election, mistakenly assuming Democrats care about winning. They don't. Losing an election costs Democratic Party leaders nothing. All the career politicians and political operatives at the top keep their careers either way. From their point of view, this is just a cushy job with sweet benefits, and they keep those win or lose. And obviously Biden himself doesn't care. He'll have a comfortable retirement regardless of the outcome in November. And on some level, he's surely aware that it's nuts for a dementia patient to be in the White House anyway. The unelected empire managers who actually run the US power structure also don't care who wins the election. They know they'll still get their murder and militarism and capitalism and imperialism no matter who gets sworn in next year. whether it's Biden or Trump or Harris or someone else. Nobody with any real power cares about your vote. And that's the real issue. That's the real point that keeps getting missed here. The problem is not that the wrong people keep getting elected. It's that the elections don't matter and voters don't have a say. It's that humanity is dominated by a murderous globe-spanning power structure loosely centralized around Washington, whose actual movements and behavior have effectively zero responsiveness to the will of the electorate. You're never going to be able to vote your way out of this mess. And you're never going to be able to not vote your way out of this mess, because the power of your vote has been undermined to a value of 0. That doesn't mean there's no way out of this mess. It just means there's no way to get out of this mess using the fake plastic diversion toy they handed you to shut you up and trick you into thinking you have a say. There are still plenty of other tools in the toolbox for forcing an evil power structure to stop doing evil things, but they require a lot of hands to bring about, and right now we don't have them. Too many people have been successfully propagandized into believing the status quo works and their government is basically good, or successfully manipulated into giving up on politics altogether and throwing their attention into other things. Before the people can begin using the power of their numbers to force real change, they're going to have to be awakened to the reality that everything they've been told about their government, their society, and their world is a lie. They've got to come to the understanding that the mainstream news media are nothing but propaganda, and they live under the most murderous and tyrannical regime on this planet. They've got to realize that this power structure does not ultimately serve their interests, or the interests of their fellow human beings around the world. Only when enough eyes open to this reality can revolutionary change via direct action become possible. The good news is it's entirely possible to help get those eyes open. Everything you do to help share the truth with your fellow citizens and spread awareness of what's really going on pushes this possibility toward reality. The more people open their eyes, the more people there are to help open others. So this could snowball from impossible to probable to inevitable quite quickly. An entire globe-spanning empire rests on a closed pair of eyelids. Once they snap open, the whole thing will crumble. And from there, we can begin building a healthy world together.
Where young black boys overachieve is race offered as an explanatory factor. For example, British, Ghanaian and Nigerian boys on free school meals, so the poorest sector, academically outperform and are more likely to go to university than similarly poor white, mixed race and black English kids whose grandparents came from the Caribbean. The 4 youngest children in Britain to ever take GCSEs are all black. Romari Wilfred, a young black boy from East London, has a higher IQ than Einstein. Young black men are more disproportionately represented in professional football than any other area of British life, with all of the consequences and implications that has for their contribution to the tax base, etc. So it's almost as if a black person does something negative, the entire so-called black community is to blame. Black person does something positive and they suddenly regain their humanity and their right to be viewed as an individual. What I'm saying is I'm not just talking about what I read in sociology books, I'm talking about what I saw in my real life.
Do you know who Smedley Butler was? If not, you definitely should. Smedley Butler was a 2-star general in the Marine Corps. He's one of only 2 Marines in history to earn the Medal of Honor twice, and at the time of his death, he was the most decorated Marine in US history. He was also a socialist and an avowed anti-imperialist. Smedley Butler joined the military during the Spanish-American War, which is considered the US's first war of foreign expansion and the birth of its global empire. At the time, the Spanish Empire controlled Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, but the Spanish Empire was also weakening. The United States, on the other hand, was a growing power and saw this as an opportunity to dethrone the Spanish Empire and become a global power itself. No different than the wars today, the United States disguised its imperialist motives by saying that they were fighting the war for humanitarian reasons, to save the poor Cuban people from the brutal Spanish Empire. The media also played the exact same role that it does today as a cheerleader for the war, writing sensational war propaganda about the brutality of the Spanish and how the US had to intervene to save the Cubans, a practice that got its own nickname, yellow journalism. Like so many young men who were eager to do good in the world, Butler got caught up in this war propaganda and enlisted in the Marine Corps at the age of 16, lying about his age to get in. He wrote later, recounting his feelings when he decided to enlist, I clenched my fist when I thought of those poor Cuban devils being starved and murdered by the beastly Spanish tyrants. Butler was deployed to Cuba in July of 1898, and for the next 20 years, Butler was sent on one imperialist expedition after another, clearing the way for US corporations with a hail of bullets. After Cuba, Butler was deployed to the Philippines, Honduras, Haiti, Nicaragua, Panama, Mexico, and even as far as China. Butler was regarded as a highly disciplined Marine and rose quickly through the ranks as an officer. But over time, he started to realize more and more that he and his fellow Marines were being used to do grunt work for big business, not to spread freedom and democracy like they thought they would when they enlisted. While he was in Nicaragua, where the US military would back a right-wing, pro-business government friendly to US corporations, Butler wrote in a letter home, "What makes me mad is that this whole revolution is inspired and financed by Americans who have wildcat investments down here and want to make them good by putting in a government which will declare a monopoly in their favor." By the time Butler retired in 1931, he had won more ribbons and medals than any Marine in US history up until that point, but after all of that, his sole conclusion was that all of the wars he fought were just big money-making schemes for corporate America. In an article he wrote for the socialist magazine Common Sense, he said, quote, "I spent 33 years and 4 months in active military service, and during that period, I spent most of my time as a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street, and the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. I helped make Mexico, and especially Tampico, safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National City Bank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. I helped purify Nicaragua for the international banking house of Brown Brothers in 1902 to 1912. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for the American sugar interests in 1916. I helped make Honduras right for the American fruit companies in 1903. In China in 1927, I helped to see that Standard Oil went on its way unmolested. Looking back on it, I might have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was operate his racket in 3 districts. I operated on 3 continents." He summarized his thoughts on war in a book called War is a Racket, in which he explains that all war is simply a racket, a money-making scheme for a small group of elites. Here's how the book opens. "War is a racket. It always has been. It's possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It's the only one international in scope. It's the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives. In World War I, a mere handful garnered the profits of the conflict. At least 21,000 new millionaires and billionaires were made in the United States during the World War. That many admitted their huge blood gains in their income tax returns. How many other war millionaires falsified their income tax returns, no one knows. How many of these millionaires shouldered a rifle? How many of them dug a trench? How many of them spent sleepless, frightened nights ducking shells and shrapnel and machine gun bullets? How many of them were wounded or killed in battle? Butler was hugely popular with veterans, not only because of his rank and reputation, but because he advocated for them. In 1932, at the height of the Great Depression, Butler helped lead the Bonus March, a massive march of World War I veterans and their families who marched on Congress to demand bonus pay that they had been promised for fighting in World War I but never received. Butler gave speeches telling the veterans that they had as much of a right to lobby Congress as anyone else. But instead of paying the soldiers, the march encampment was broken up with cavalry charges and tear gas. The Bonus March demonstrated the power that veterans could wield when organized. Big business interests took notice of this power and Butler's influence with veterans, and in 1934, Butler claims he was approached by a businessman named Gerald P. McGuire, who said that a group of businessmen, backed by 500,000 soldiers and $3 million from JP Morgan Bank, were planning to overthrow President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and said that they wanted Butler to lead the plot and become America's fascist dictator. Butler refused and instead testified to Congress about the plot. After hearing Butler's testimony, the committee said, quote, "There was no question that these attempts were discussed, were planned, and might have been placed in execution," and that, quote, "the committee was able to verify all the pertinent statements made by General Butler. Nonetheless, there was no further investigation into the matter, and the media dismissed it as a hoax." Butler would spend the rest of his life speaking out against war profiteering until his death in 1940. Even though he was one of the most decorated and widely respected Marines in US history, I'm willing to bet that most of the people you know, and probably a lot of you watching this, have never even heard of him. And it's obvious why. All of the soldiers that are elevated as war heroes in our culture all have one thing in common. They obediently follow their orders and carry them out without question. They never question the motives of the war, they never speak out, and therefore they never threaten the politicians and the war profiteers. It's like the war profiteers put a model of the exact kind of soldier they want in all of our movies and TV shows. And that's why you never hear about soldiers like Smedley Butler, and why they tried to smear Aaron Bushnell. There's a long history of soldiers engaging in mutiny and revolt that they hide from us because a lot of times these revolts become a catalyst for revolution. The fundamental lie that all wars are built on is this idea that some guy far away, someone you've never met halfway across the world, is somehow your enemy, and not the millionaire politicians and their billionaire owners sending you to die. Our enemy isn't in some far-off land speaking foreign languages and hiding in caves. Our enemy's right here. It's all these politicians who foam at the mouth to send our children to war, and all the CEOs who make money off them dying. War has always been around here. The ruling class knows this better than anyone because they're the ones that benefit. And they fear the military waking up to this because the day that happens is the day the guns turn around.
I care nothing of what people who will heap horror on the minds and bodies of children of this spaceship Earth. I hold no regard to what they think about me. Them not like me, I mean I like them. And that's that. There's no teachable moments here. If you can't rely on the weight and light of your own conscience to know right or wrong, then Godspeed to you and get out of my face. Stay away from me.
We have been following every development of the Michigan Biden boycott started by Arab and Muslim leaders, starting with the uncommitted vote in Tuesday's primary, which we will be live as the results of that come in. So we'll get to see the strength of that. Don't expect Biden to lose to uncommitted, folks. I don't want to set your aims too high. A shit lib is a shit lib, a Democrat is a Democrat. But I think it will be significant. I think it will register significantly. And unlike Our Revolution and Rashida Tlaib and Michael Moore, who are doing the half-assed uncommitted, the founders of this uncommitted movement are determined to actually voting uncommitted or blank in the general election. And you'll see that reflected here. This is an MSNBC panel with 4 of these Michigan voters, and watch what they have to say about Joe Biden.
Is there a pathway forward for you with Biden?
Oh, absolutely not. You cannot keep killing people with our money and just keep thinking that, oh, we are stupid enough to elect you again because we'll fall in line. We'll forget. Like, this is an insult to me as a voter.
For you, Biden has a pathway forward.
Biden has a pathway forward. It's not.
And what does that look like?
That is him calling for a permanent and immediate ceasefire. The straightforward, simple answer for the Biden administration is push for a ceasefire, stop aiding Israel in their war crimes, and I guarantee you there are enough people who would be willing to deal with it and vote for the man.
Okay, you know what? I'm sorry. I should have said I love 3 out of these 4 voters. This would be the exception. What do you mean he needs to secure a ceasefire? I'm sorry. Like, yeah, obviously we want a ceasefire, but in terms of are you going to vote for him? How has that ship not sailed? 12,000 children are already dead. There's no bringing them back. The idea that you would go back and vote for him if he secures a ceasefire now or a week or in a month from now? Why? How is it not too late already?
Well, you can see this guy has vote blue no matter who tendencies that he's having a hard time giving up.
Yeah, this is the Michael Moore group here.
He's the Michael Moore, yes.
Yeah. And I guarantee you there are enough people who would be willing to deal with it and vote for them. It is, in so many words, insane to me to have the Democratic Party and the Biden administration sit here and essentially say, if Trump happens, it's your fault.
If you don't want a Trump presidency, then are you not worried about what he could do domestically to this country?
I am, it's like a vaccine. I'm willing to take
short-term pain for a long-term gain. I'm willing to
This guy understands politics. Look at him.
let go of Joe Biden and oppose Joe Biden, make him a one-term president, punish Joe Biden by making him a one-term president and pairing his loss with the genocide in Gaza.
Boom.
Why does our democracy, why is having a Trump presidency more important than those people's lives?
Yeah.
Why is our democracy more important than thousands of men, women, and children being killed?
That's my favorite, Annie Wisner. This guy's good too. This guy's good too. But that.
Why does our democracy, why is having a Trump presidency more important than those people's lives?
Yes.
Why is our democracy more important than thousands of men, women, and children being killed?
Whoa! Ha! Woo! That's it. Why is our democracy, quote unquote, which look what they've already done. They've canceled the primaries, they disenfranchised New Hampshire, and then because Biden won, now they're going to count the votes because they got the result they wanted. I mean, what democracy are you talking about? You're talking about a democracy that has produced two psychotic and demented octogenarians. Trump is not technically that yet, but he will be if he wins. I mean, this is the democracy. So even on that score, like, what democracy are we actually saving by keeping Trump out? But on the second point, the much more important point, why is our democracy more important than these 12,000 kids who have been massacred? Why? Why do our lives matter? Because, I took a quick look at a former friend of the show. They wrote a Substack article about how if the left wants to connect with the working class, they have to stop talking about foreign policy because poor and working class people here don't have time to care about that. Well, I'm sorry.
Really?
Poor and working class people here are no more important than poor and working class people anywhere else in the world. And they're certainly no more important than children who are living in tents right now with their families, knowing that any second a bomb could fall out of the sky and that could be it for them. I'm sorry. I'm all for the working class here. But nobody in America is any more important than anyone else anywhere in the world. And what's happening now is an obscenity, a world historic obscenity. And the idea that we're supposed to fear the consequences for our institutions if Trump gets back in, and the idea that whatever harm he does matters more cosmically, spiritually, morally, matters more than the just unspeakable awfulness of what's happening in Gaza right now. That is Western chauvinism, and dare I say it, racism. And so that was just a beautiful response.
Whenever the left has been at its strongest, its most potent, its most ideologically clear, it has been at moments when the left has had an international perspective.
That too, yes. The labor movement was more effective when it had a global perspective than it is now under Sean Fain. Oh, ceasefire, yeah, but oh no, okay, all right, we'll endorse you anyway.
Right. When you look at how the radicals of the 60s and 70s spoke, it was very much with a global vision, with a global lens, particularly black radical leaders. Very much would put their struggle in the context of a broader worldwide movement against oppression, injustice, fascism, and authoritarianism. So I think that's a very foolish perspective to say that the left is more effective if we only keep to navel gazing within our country. I think it's good for the left to put everything in the context of a global struggle, because it is a global struggle. I think this Palestine has really brought up and brought to the surface the first world problems nature of so much of what American liberals, and even a lot of people who think of themselves as left, prioritize. That came up in another story we covered about abortion rights, where somebody was saying, well, what about the rights of the women who are being slaughtered and the girls who are being slaughtered in Gaza? Well, I'm supposed to put my abortion rights before their right to live, their right to be alive. How is that not a feminist issue? So yeah, I mean, that is coming up with a lot of people who are refusing to vote for Joe Biden, and God bless them, man. And like, a lot of them are articulating that, like, hey, the things you're saying I need to vote for Joe Biden to protect are things that these people who are being genocided don't have and can't even dream of having. So why is that a priority?
Of course. We covered the Bassem Youssef Chris Cuomo interview a while back where he said, look, yeah, I'm all for reproductive rights. If you're in a state that doesn't allow it, you have a place to go. And now you should not have to go there, obviously. And there are people for whom a bus ticket out of town is not something that they can pay for. And so that's obviously a horrible situation. But they have options relative to a family in Gaza now, crowded into Rafah, with no place to go. The only thing they can do is pray that every second is not their last. That's all they can do. And so how is any problem that any of us face more important than those problems that people are facing there?
In the face of that, there are very few people in America, frankly, who have problems that are not first world problems by comparison.
By comparison. Exactly right. Please clap.
And there is this saying that Nigerians and Indians were both colonized by the British. But the Indians rejected the British culture. They rejected the British religion. They rejected the British food. They rejected the British way of doing things and hold on to the British technology. And then we have the Nigerians, that is us Africans, accepted the British culture, the British dress code, the British food, the British every religion, and rejected the British technology. Now that is where the Indians are the most advanced. They don't need to speak English to make a cell phone. But me and you are colonized to believe that the more you speak a better English, you can clean it. You are intelligent. But a perfect English is not a mark of intelligence.
We are with the 3rd Assault Brigade in Ukraine. We can't say exactly where we are, but this is one of the fiercest brigades in all of Ukraine.
Okay, you can't say exactly where you are, but can you tell us exactly who the 3rd Assault Brigade is?
Yeah. Can you tell us, Aaron? Because I have a feeling she won't.
Okay, well, yes, I can answer. The 3rd Assault Brigade is the Azov Battalion.
Ta-da!
And that is the neo-Nazi brigade that the U.S. Congress explicitly forbids U.S. assistance to. And so now Martha Raddatz is embedding with a neo-Nazi militia, and she can't tell you where they are, and she certainly will not tell you who they are because they're neo-Nazis. But let's let the leader of Azov Battalion explain who they are. Beletsky said in 2010 that Ukraine's purpose was, quote, to lead the white races of the world in a final crusade against Semite-led Untermenschen, inferior races, and his supporters called him white ruler. White Martha Raddatz is embedding with the brigade led by the neo-Nazi white ruler.
Why are white people so intimidated and threatened by black men, despite their claims that black men are inferior to them and incapable of the most basic tasks?
Well, there's an easy answer to that question. They know black men are superior to them. Put us on any playing field, be it physics or football, and we will win. Give us the same opportunities, and we will win. Because we come from a history of not trying to destroy and dominate the world, and you come from a history of trying to destroy and dominate the world. And that has become the culture of the white community.
We are ruled by sociopaths and morons. Notes from the Edge. The response to the Gaza crisis from Western leaders and media outlets and celebrities shows very clearly that we really are led by the least among us. The least wise, the least intelligent, the least compassionate, the least insightful. We are ruled by sociopaths and morons. You are being offered 2 narratives to choose from. 1. Palestinians in Gaza are evil orc-like savages who just want to murder Jews and must therefore be caged and killed. 2. Palestinians in Gaza are thinking human beings who are reacting to intolerable abuses inflicted upon them. Which is more believable? We're being told that Israel needs to wage a relentless bombing campaign which is killing civilians by the thousands in order to eliminate Hamas, because Hamas must be destroyed to achieve a lasting peace. Every part of this is transparently false. Firstly, the premise that Hamas must be eliminated to achieve peace is fallacious. Peace can be achieved by eliminating the abuses and righting the wrongs which gave rise to Hamas in the first place. There's no rational reason to believe Hamas would continue to exist in its current iteration or keep waging violent resistance if the theft and injustice from 1948 onward were rolled back, refugees had the right to return, apartheid abuses were ended, and people were no longer kept in a giant concentration camp where they are deprived of basic human needs. Secondly, the premise that you can bomb people into accepting an abusive status quo is self-evidently absurd. Even if Israel kills every single member of Hamas, there will be hundreds of thousands of survivors of this onslaught who see the depravity of Israel and refuse to accept it. You think all these orphaned boys and all these men who saw their loved ones ripped apart by military explosives are just going to be cool with the status quo from here on out? Of course not. And Israel knows this, which is why its preferred solution is to kick all survivors of this onslaught out of Gaza and into refugee camps in the Sinai Peninsula. It knows that nothing it's doing will actually work, and it refuses to make the reparations that will work, so its only other option is the elimination of Gazans one way or the other. Ethnic cleansing and mass displacement is not peace by any stretch of the imagination, but it might allow Israel to keep its abusive status quo intact. Those are Israel's only real options for sustainable stability. Either right all the wrongs which led to this, or go the opposite direction and inflict far more wrongs to answer the Palestinian question once and for all. It's pretty clear watching all this that Israel has opted for the latter. The narrative managers are still struggling with the problem that when they announced that Palestinians had escaped from their concentration camp and killed a bunch of Israelis, an inconvenient number of people started asking, wait, what were they doing in a concentration camp? I find nothing less morally or philosophically interesting than pontificating on how the traumatized prisoners of a horrible concentration camp should have conducted themselves once they broke free of its confines. As far as I'm concerned, everything that happened on October 7th was the result of generations of Israeli abuse, the British decisions which made it all possible, and the American backing which has kept it going. Israeli policies created Hamas. I don't mean this in the usual Netanyahu boosted Hamas to sabotage peace and undermine its more moderate rivals sense. I mean it in the those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable sense. If you stomp out every possible peaceful avenue of resistance, naturally you're going to see the rise of factions which favor violent resistance. One of my most formative experiences in understanding this conflict happened in 2018 when I watched Israeli soldiers firing on protesters with sniper rifles and live ammo. B'Tselem explicitly denounced this as unlawful. There's nothing that could possibly make such a thing okay, and it was a very clear illustration of the way Israel has cut Palestinians off from all the normal pathways toward peaceful resolution. I said when all this started that I believe the Hamas attack will ultimately be a net negative for Palestinians, but that I can't in good conscience condemn Hamas because nobody can articulate a positive direction that Palestinians should be taking. The fact that all peaceful avenues of resistance have been cut off is not the fault of the Palestinians, and it's not the fault of Hamas. It's the fault of the Israeli government. Hamas is just what you get when you create an intolerably abusive apartheid state which keeps millions of people in a concentration camp whose inhabitants are cut off from basic needs and make peaceful revolution impossible. Hamas isn't the disease, it's a symptom of the disease. The disease is an apartheid settler colonialist project which cannot exist without endless violence, warfare, and abuse. I refuse to be shamed and demonized for supporting peace by people who support the ongoing massacre of thousands of children.
And you know we can't be fazed.
Do you see why I don't like religion? More people have died over religious beliefs than any other reason on the face of the planet. And then you got people like America, countries like America, that's actually funding the war. They're funding the Ukrainian and Russian war. They're funding the Israeli war. As soon as that thing happened, they were like, oh yeah, it's money time. Hey guys, get Betty, Sue, and John and them to put some money on Apache. We're gonna have to bring in the ships and everything. Any company we have that has any military prowess, go ahead and do them. We're gonna do the stock options on them. Go ahead and do some long calls. And when our military shows up and our helicopters show up, all those stocks are gonna spike.
These woodpeckers are engaged in an important business. They are preparing acorns by hammering them into holes in the tree that the woodpeckers have prepared in advance. This is very painstaking work. It is necessary to precisely select the right size holes for each acorn. In case